Good morning. Wow. Our reading today is going to be amazing. Let me do a little bit of extra things I have to do today. There we go. Our reading today is going to be amazing. I want you to stop for a minute and imagine walking through the wilderness and seeing a man cutting apart a cow, a goat, a sheep, having some pigeons and doves sitting there, and it would kind of be shocking. You would go, what's going on? But this is what takes place in our reading today, and it is an amazing statement of God's love for us. First of all, we're going to be reading Genesis chapters 13 through 16, and I want us to go back, if you can today, just go back to chapter 12 and reread it. Because from 12 to 16, 17, there's some continuity that we just need to kind of keep in place. God makes promises to Abraham, and as he makes those promises to Abraham, he continues in chapter 12, in chapter 13, in chapter 15, and then in chapter 15, he does something to seal those promises, and we're going to look at that. A few other things just to be looking at. In chapter 12, again, verse 1, we find the very first time that the name Yahweh is used in the Bible. Read it. It's an important part of the promise that God makes. And then we find again Melchizedek, who is a type of Christ. So we are seeing types of Christ. We are seeing types of redemption. We are seeing God's grace and his love for us and his attributes and our response to him abundantly in our reading today. So take time to read through and contemplate the questions that we've been thinking about. But I wanted to focus on chapter 15, verse 18. It says, "In the day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." This is commonly called the Abrahamic covenant. Now, I want to kind of examine what's taking place. Remember I said as we walked through the wilderness, we saw this man, and he was cutting apart these animals, and he was laying them in two lines so that there was a pathway in between. Well, this is part of that covenant. And if two people were to come to an agreement, they would reach that agreement, and then they would seal it in the most stringent way, the strongest way they could, with this blood covenant. And they would lay these dead carcasses out, and they would walk through. First of all, they would take some time, and they would contemplate what the promises were. They would think about those promises and whether or not they wanted to enter into this covenant. Then they would walk through those dead bodies, and they would speak their promises. And at the end, they would turn and they would give something. Oftentimes, it was their belt, their sword. They would give something of importance to the other person, and that would seal that covenant. And it meant that they, by their name unto death, they were offering this covenant. This is what we're seeing here with Abraham, and God is entering into this agreement with Abraham. Abraham separates everything out and he puts it all together. And as he puts it all together, he thinks about it. And the Bible tells us he has to stop and keep the birds off of the carcasses because the day is passing. There's this moment, this time of contemplation, of thinking about what's going on. And then the Bible tells us that a deep sleep fell upon Abraham. And we see there in the dark, God shows up, and he alone. Now this is the difference between this covenant and every other covenant that can be made by man. Abraham was asleep. He had received the promises, but God walks through these carcasses, these bodies, these animals that have been torn apart. And as he walks through these carcasses, we see the flame coming from the lamp. This is the Shekinah glory of God. There is no greater thing by which God can bring upon and bring to us than his name and his Shekinah glory. His glory represents his face. He walks through and he passes through and he repeats these things. You see, in this covenant, only one party passes through, and that's God. And God pledges himself to death, that his promises will be true. As we look at that at the end, the gift that is given, what is the gift that God could give to seal this promise? And this is where we begin to see the typology. We begin to see the prophecy. We begin to see redemption, because God sealed this to us. He sealed this covenant to us in the death of his Son. By his great name he came and he died for us. And this blood covenant that we have between God and us, the exchange of gifts is this. God sent his Son, his only begotten Son. Think about that. What could be more personal than his Son? This passage is filled with images of redemption. It is filled with images of God's love for us. Later in the Mosaic covenant, God would again require these sacrifices, but no animal could ever fill this covenant. You see, the blood that was sprinkled on the scrolls, on the tabernacle, even on the people, was from the animals, were only representative of the blood of the Lamb. We sing a song sometimes, what can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. These passages today, these scriptures today, they speak to us of God's plan from the beginning. From the beginning, God had a plan that he would redeem us. The ceremonies that were in the law, and even what Moses saw here, or what Abraham saw, these cannot possibly fulfill that covenant. Only Jesus. Only Jesus. I want you to think about what God has done. What he has done for you and what he's done for me. All the blood of Jesus that washes us white as snow. You see, when God passed through, he could declare by nothing greater than his name. He declared his name, and by his name, this covenant has been set. And knowing that we serve an eternal God that cannot die, he cannot break his oath, he cannot break his promise, we are sealed. We are sealed by his promise, by his name, by his blood. What joy there is in serving God. I invite you today to just rejoice in the fact that God has given himself. His great name seals us. His blood seals us. His oath is unbreakable. That's the promise of God to you. God bless you. Have an awesome day.